So welcome everyone. Welcome to this third GUNi Talk of the program International Call to Action. And thank you especially to Dr. Liliana Arroyo and Iain MacLaren for accepting this invitation to be part of this discussion, no? on a relevant and a critical topic on how technology impacts higher education and especially the youth culture. It will be the focus of today's session. And the session will consist of first a discussion between the speakers, the dialogue between the speakers, and then we will open the floor for you participants to express your thoughts on this topic. So before we dive into the discussion, we would like to present our esteemed speakers. On the one hand, we have Dr. Liliana Arroyo, who is a sociologist and a specialist in digital social innovation. And she's currently a teacher at ESADE Business School in Barcelona. Her professional activities have encompassed the world of research, teaching, and dissemination. She has participated on research teams of projects with social impact in different areas of sociology. She's also a member of various advisory boards in academic, cultural, and third sector entities, and has a decade of experience in independent consultant. She has also published some nonfiction work, and more recently has published a book which his title is Bienvenido Metaverso, Presencia, Cuerpo y Avatares en la Era Digital, in English, and Welcome Metaversity, Presence, Body, and Avatars in the Digital Age. And on the other hand, we have Iain MacLaren, who is the director of the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at the University of Galway in Ireland. And throughout his career, he has made significant contributions to educational policy, both at national and international levels, collaborating with government bodies and NGOs. And he has a range of responsibilities, including technologies to support teaching and learning, both in classroom, so in person, or in online, virtual. And prior to take this role of director of the center, he taught and researched in a number of universities in Scotland and in England. And his own disciplinary background is astrophysics, which broadened also to multimedia technologies and education. So, without further comments, let us open the discussion, and we will start first with a contextualization, and then we will focus on topics like digital leadership, the impact of artificial intelligence in higher education, and the benefits and challenges of technology for youth. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Iain, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, Liliana.
I was super ready but muted, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for telling me. So yeah, I was just thanking you for having me today. So thanks to all the GUNi Talk team, and it's a pleasure to share this webinar with Iain, but also with all international members that I see that they are connected. So I would like to start with an overview. It's not only about technology, but it's more in the second part, so youth culture. So I have prepared three slides with two figures and one image, just to start the conversation. So just in case any of you are not looking at the screen, maybe you would like to check the slides that I will be sharing, and afterwards during the conversation there will be no slides or almost any. So let's go for it. So the first figure I wanted to share with you is are the slides moving on? Are moving forward? Yes. Can you see? Okay. So the first thing you can see, it's a 26% on your screen, and you can start thinking about different aspects that could be reflected on this 26%. If you even want to make some guesses on the chat, it's welcome. Okay.
But I will keep moving. So why I'm using this 26%? Because this is a figure that reflects, and I'm sure you have been hearing other aspects about that. It's that 1 in 4 young people in the world feels lonely. Okay, and when we are using this data, we are using data from 142 countries. So when we say that it's a global situation, it's affecting youth across the globe. I'm sure in your countries also it's something worrying. And most of the teenagers, for instance, here the data we have, it's between 15 and 18 years old. It's this amount, so the proportion of teenagers and adolescents and youth that are feeling alone, it's bigger than the ones that are plus 65, which sometimes it's something that can be shocking because we tend to underestimate the loneliness among youth and adolescents. So that's why I wanted to start with that. So they are growing in a world which is digitally embedded. They are more connected than ever, but connecting and bonding are different things. So they feel alone in a persistent way. And what the problem with loneliness, it's not only that you can feel lonely at some point in time, which also it's something which is present in the youth condition, I would say. The problem is when this is a persistent feeling and that it's chronified. And also because it's a factor, it's a risk factor for many other things in terms of health and in terms of cohesion and in terms of trust to institutions and so on. And also it's a big predictor of loneliness across life. So it's not only a youth matter, but it's a public health matter that we need to address, right? So that's the first figure. So probably 1 in 4 students that you are seeing in class, it's feeling alone in a way that it's important and that it's urgent to pay attention to. The second thing is that probably you have boys and girls in sitting in front of you when you're in class, or men and women, and we're also seeing a huge gender gap in raising generations. And one of the figures that I bring here is the 21% versus 14%, and it's about the ideological spectrum. And this is something that in the sociological field we call it affective polarization, and it's basically taking into account the turn to the right of youth, particularly male, particularly in young adults, okay, that are male. There are many reviews and meta-analyses that are paying attention to this phenomenon because it's a gap that is increasing, and it's worrying because it's also affecting the way they see democracy and the way that they trust in institutions and so on. So again, this is a world that it's polarized by many factors, but the gender gap, it's quite important. And also when we talk about technology or digital landscapes, gender also matters, because normally what we see is that capacities and also self-confidence in how to use new tools and how to develop themselves in the digital domains and digital areas and environments, normally boys are more fluent and girls are more precocious, okay? And this is translating in many other factors. For instance, that in the technological sector, there's one woman hired by every 3 men. So this is also reflecting how technology is conceived, it's built, it's constructed, and it's used. Not only used, but also how it is developed, okay? And last but not the least, I wanted to show this picture here, which is from 2 years ago in a shopping mall close to Barcelona, in Badalona. And what you can see here is it's many people in line, okay, different ages, but some were looking at it, but many of them, they were participating at it. And basically what was here, so the claim to be standing in line for young people here was that they could scan their iris, okay. So they could eye scan with this silver ball that you can see here, and they were given some Bitcoins. Okay, so they were introduced in the crypto world, probably without any kind of economic education or financial education, and also lacking some context about digital rights and what does it mean to put your eye in this ball. It's not only a photo of your iris, but it's much more, right? Also, of course, without understanding who is behind this campaign, what kind of users are they planning for this data, and where is it stored, and under which rules, and so on and so forth, right? So I think that it's important, I mean, to start before starting to talk about AI and so on. These were like three main lines or three main aspects that I wanted to put on the table because this is the context where our kids and our young people are coming to our classes, right? And also, I was this morning in another gathering, and in this case, it was a foundation that it's having. I think that it's about 5 education centers, primary and high school centers in Catalonia, so Barcelona and the surrounding area, and their concern was basically that they are losing the focus on what does it mean to educate in this new current world, and also how they can still embed the values in a context which apparently they feel completely overwhelmed by what we like to call in a funny way the arrival technologies that apparently AI it's raining down upon us, but that's not the thing. Okay, we have agency and we have the capacity to decide when and why are we adopting these technologies. But this is like the big overview I wanted to share you at the beginning, and now I'm handing over to Iain. So I will stop sharing my screen and then we can follow the discussion. So Iain, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction as well. I'm Iain MacLaren. I'm going to talk about universities in particular, higher education, I guess. And really the context there is one in which all of us are experiencing a really rapid pace of change when it comes to technology. Over the last 10, 15 years, been incredible changes. And not just in terms of, highly efficient computer systems that we have at our disposal in our little phones these days, but also actually the impact on the whole sector. We've seen a big shift in the last 10 years to the cloud or subscription model, which changed fundamentally, actually, the economics of how universities can deal with technologies since it moved to a renter rather than an ownership model. There's constant pressure to upgrade, to integrate, to bring in lots of digital systems. Very, very expensive, very difficult for many institutions to keep up with, but also technologically challenging. And of course, the promise that we're given is that these technologies in combination will enhance the educational experience and they will make administration much more efficient. Now, for those of you working in universities, you might not actually have appreciated how spectacularly efficient our organizations are. In other words, the promise of these technologies is not necessarily one that's being lived up to. In reality, when we talk about technologies and education, we need to realize that there is actually a lot of research on how people learn. And quite a lot of that research is not really appropriately used by educational technology vendors. Educational technology companies pursue a particular model of learning that they think is appropriate, but it isn't necessarily the one that we as educators realize is effective. They tend to focus on the individual, the learner as an individual. And we have this narrative feeding into higher education from these vendors and from others of individualism. We tend not to think about learning together as a group. And also we have the narrative of, for example, employability. Many universities will talk about how their degrees will lead the students to a fantastic career. But it's often portrayed as a kind of competitive individual approach rather than something collective. And for teachers and those who lead courses, and for the institutions and the students in them, there's a huge need for training, continually adapting to new systems and new technologies. And that means there's a great deal of need for support, but also for critique, because we need to not just take these tools, I guess, at face value, but think about, you know, how effective they really are, if at all, and what the motivating factors are of those who would seek to sell them to us. And it's only really if you have that critique and that broader picture, I think, that you can genuinely innovate. Now, for many years now, in Europe, there has been the European Digital Competence Framework for Educators. It's a very long title, that. So it's shortened as DigComp-Edu. Now, DigComp-Edu is used by a number of institutions, but in some countries it's not that well known, and others it's very popular. It essentially, though, attempts to center the learning experience as an interaction between an educator and a learner, and that the educator has professional competencies and skills, and they also have to have pedagogic competencies, educational skills. And that's something that isn't necessarily always the case in many universities who are focusing often on research, for example, more than teaching in some cases. But it's good that this structure, which is about digital competence, at its heart is actually about the educational aspect, and it's not about listing a set of specific skills with particular tools and software. I'm working on a number of projects, and one of the projects at the moment that's relevant to the discussion we're about to have, hopefully, has got the name QT. It's always amusing to try and come up with an acronym for these projects, and sometimes people are running out of words, but QT is what we're called. And QT project is about digital leadership. It's about saying, okay, in this complex, rapidly changing context, how can we help people who are heads of school, heads of department in a higher education institution, or leaders of a team of teachers? How can we help them to feel confident in this technological age, and also to support their own teams of teachers? And as I said, we need to make sure that people have a good pedagogical and educational knowledge, and that's not pushed aside by the latest enthusiasm for the latest technology. So we want people to, in our project, we want people to be able to critique and to recognize alternatives, as well as what the appropriate use of particular technologies is versus the inappropriate. And we really want people to be able to be aware of the bigger picture of the sector, the drivers, and the motivations. But that's just a start. So I'll pass back to you, Liliana. Sorry, you're on mute.
Again, now we're opening the discussion floor, and I thought it was super interesting what you were sharing. So everything, but in particular that we always understand learning as an individual process, while there's many evidence that explain how the importance of peer-to-peer interaction or role models and so on, just to learn or to motivate. So I think it's really important that we always consider these 2 or 3 levels, right? The individual, the group level, and also the class level or the organizational level. So yeah, I think it's
absolutely, and and it happens too as well that when we're talking about the professional development of university lecturers or academics, again, it's often very individual. It's about how you perform as an individual in terms of your publications and grants and so forth. And it's ironic because we ideally think of universities as a academic community, collegial, community of scholars. But in practice, most people experience it often as competitive, individual advantage. And I think that's a challenge. And when it comes to the technology in particular, there's a long history of educational technology companies pursuing what they call personalized learning. And the focus is that the computer system will understand your needs as a particular individual and feed to you the materials that you need at the stage you're at. And it's a great pity that kind of narrative still dominates when we're in essentially a networked world. We should be able to do something more collectively. We should take advantage of the fact that we're in a scholarly community, and a lot more peer learning and peer teaching.
Yeah, and sometimes I also wonder if we could use technology. Well, while we were preparing this session, you were also talking about the need or not need to embed the digital in all aspects of teaching and enhancing learning and being more efficient and so on. And I wonder if we could open a debate, and maybe this phase today, it's one of the main floors, right, that we could open this, to use technology not with the purpose of learning, but which is of course convenient, in a meaningful way, but also this idea of how technology can help us to connect better between students and among students, but also between teachers and students and other stuff in the university. Because as you were saying, the university, it's not a building with teachers and students. There's a whole community, and there are many other people and other different roles that at the university they make possible that every day we are running sessions, that we are, enrolling students and making exams and so on.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also about, that, as I say, it's the underlying conception of what learning is. And I think that differs. I think that there are many different ideas in one thing that's really interesting about a university is that it's made up of so many different faculty and staff as well as the students. And each of those groups of faculty and staff all have different conceptions of what a university is or what it's for.
Yes.
So it isn't a single entity, but I actually think that's what makes it exciting. But I don't think that leadership in general in universities fully takes advantage of that variety. It's often about fixating on a particular model, adopting a model that everybody should go, rather than celebrating the diverse views, diverse conceptions of what learning might be, and how a university plays a role, either as training the next generation of professionals or as contributing to public debate or a storehouse of cultural knowledge. All of those things are equally valid. And sometimes I think institutions feel under pressure to adopt a mission statement that's really actually quite narrow and doesn't take advantage of the diversity amongst their own members.
Definitely. And listening to you, I also recall some conversations I have. I'm teaching sociology and like to be provocative at some extent. So the campus where I normally teach on, it's close to a market, to a traditional market, and sometimes I like to walk out with my students and take them to the market just to observe, because if they need to understand social realities, they need to understand how to read that, right? And how to relate with that beyond their normal dynamics, their regular activities and their usual circles of trust, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because so their main reaction is first they feel lost.
Yeah.
When I take them to the market, and then they start making pictures, and then I leave them. I mean, I don't give any. I don't give any rule at the beginning. They start exploring freely themselves, and then I gather them together in tiny groups, and then I suggest that they take a notebook and they can draw and they can take notes and they can educate their sociological gaze, right? And another thing I do is also to invite them to reflect on the power dynamics behind the tools they are using, right? So even the tools that we're using at university, because we have a license for, in our case it's Microsoft, and then in terms of AI we are allowed to be using Copilot and so on. But I think that there's a larger discussion that can go beyond and even before in which session and to what purpose we are using AI, which is a larger, a broader reflection about what does it mean and what does it reflect about the world we are living in, and also the economic dynamics and geopolitical dynamics behind it. So I also teach technoethics, and to some extent it's connected to the Digicom Edu that you were saying. There are many different frameworks, not only the Digicom Edu, which is of course targeting faculty and teachers. There's also the DigiCon version 2, which is for the general population. And there's another one about soft skills that you need to learn, which is another, maybe we can share afterwards the link, which is a set of different skills that you need to be equipped with to be a citizen of a European country in the 21st century, which again is also about these soft skills, but also this capacity to have critical thinking. And another one, it's I don't remember the name exactly, but it's connected to the capacity to unlearn what you have learned, which is the capacity, the adaptation capacity and flexibility, right? So these topics, I think, that are also super important.
I think it's really interesting too. I mean, you were talking about the loneliness that's how you of young people, and that's something obviously that I guess many of us came to realize during the COVID-19 experience. And in the COVID-19 experience, we had a huge switch to online learning. Everybody had to suddenly become experts in the use of technologies such as Zoom that we're using here. But it also, I think, when we talk with young people, discover the extent to which actually, they felt really isolated. Even though we were reaching in through the network, there was something intrinsically valuable to humans that was missing in that online-only experience. And so that should really have been a key learning point for technologies as well. And I'm not sure that necessarily that was fully grasped. So many people value now human company, the human interaction, just like you're saying, taking your students to the market. That's great. Lots of people can see those sorts of things we couldn't do during that lockdown period, and I guess we underestimated as a species, perhaps even, how important it is for us to be with one another where that's possible. And I think that sometimes as I say, educational technologists and promoters of the technologies sometimes forget that. It's only been a couple of years. And now it's all this obsession with everything has to be online. Everything has to be digital. There's a writer, John Drawn, who's in Canada in Athabasca University, and he's makes some interesting points, which others have made too, that actually when we're thinking about teaching and learning and educating, that the word technology is often misused to only apply to these digital tools. But really, in a sense, how we teach, the methods we use, those are technologies of a kind. The technology of you walking through the market with your students. And so he says that we should really think about the role of the teacher is far more skilled than many people appreciate, because the teacher has a whole assemblage of possible tools, technologies, and techniques. And if they're to bring the student to a greater understanding and appreciation of the subject, then essentially what the teacher is doing is orchestrating all of those different instruments and tools and techniques. And that puts them all on an equal par. You shouldn't say it has to be the digital technology. No, it might well be that for these cases, we should say, no, the technology is not adequate to teach this particular approach. So I think that richer idea of teaching technique, and of broader conception of technologies is really, really important when we're in projects that are talking about digital technologies. So this is only a small subset of the possibilities.
Definitely. I also like to think about the teacher as a role, as an experienced curator, and it's precisely what you're saying, right? So you can have a wide range of experiences that you can design for your students, and also even to adapt. And I think this is something that makes our profession like a passion as well, right? It's not that so even if you are using the same slides in different sections, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, the class, it's completely different. Yep. Because if you are paying attention to what happens there and reactions and so on, of course there are patterns and there are common patterns, but if you pay attention and you are open to this orchestrating role, different things always happen. And that being said, I'm also reminding a piece of news at The Economist. Many, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, which was a bit pessimistic about the role of universities and the future of universities, because of this connection between to what extent when you go face to face to a place, it's like a sort of commitment. When you put your body and you go to class, you're putting your body. And some public universities are seeing that their classes are empty because, and I'm sure that this is the situation of many colleagues here that are connected. So feel free to share your experiences. So one of the widest concerns is why students enroll to the university but then they don't want to go there. There are many explanations, and one simple I would say one simple way to see these is that they are disappointed with master classes in a traditional way, and this is a stream of discussion, I would say, but also I think that we are missing something here, because if we are talking that they feel lonely, if we reinforce this community level idea that you were sharing before, then university it's no longer a place where you can absorb content. It's where you bond. It's where you build your thought. Is where you can connect. Is where you can contrast with your peers, but also with your teachers and so on. And I'm really concerned about that, because of course we can use schemes of attendance tracking and so on, but they will be sitting there, but technology offers different avenues for advice. Exactly. That's it.
Yeah, I know it's really interesting, and it's really interesting to explore why that's the situation. And as you say, there are some simple explanations. Often, sometimes it's because people are working, and we have to accept in some countries it's very expensive to do avail of higher education. But yes, in others there's a disconnect in a sense, and perhaps that this kind of promotion of the idea that education is a collection of content, is information transfer, and again, technology companies are often promoting that angle. I think one of the interesting things you were saying about people speculating on the future of universities, and universities are very good at worrying about their future, and you could argue that perhaps that's why they've lasted so long. If we think back to as long ago as 2012, in Time magazine was called the year of the MOOC, the massive open online courses. And if you recall, at that time, Sebastian Thrun and others who founded Udacity and other companies were saying in a couple of decades' time, there will only be 50 universities left in the world, and Udacity will be one of them. Now, he later admitted he regretted saying that, but there was a huge hype about this technologically led transformative potential, and it didn't yield what people suggested it would yield, to put it mildly. And almost all of those MOOC companies went bust, or were taken over, or were converted into traditional online training courses, programs. So it's really, I think, interesting. That's not to say that we should be complacent each time a wave comes along, but we also need to be critical of hype that comes, know that it comes in cycles, and be able to understand, is there something positive that we can get out of this approach that helps us in our fundamental goal of educating, and what can we lay aside? And I think we're seeing quite a lot of that again in recent times with the advent of Gen AI. So I've mentioned AI, so we were inevitably going to get there.
Yes, exactly. And I'm also thinking that if back in 2012 it was the MOOC a year, it was the buzzword. At least here in Spain, we are now in a moment of micro credentials. So this idea of having mini courses and micro access, which I think it's again another interesting thing, which is to some extent it can be like more sophisticated way to articulate MOOCs, like in a tiny way, in an express way. Maybe it's a sort of evolution. And in terms of, in sociological perspective, in terms of being more accessible. So universities being more accessible to different roles and different populations. I think it's really interesting. And also we are seeing here how important it is, for instance, to not only for the upskilling but also reskilling, and for the landscape of changing professions and so on, and for having this transition under a scheme of digital transformation which is responsible, and that it's not exposing people from the labor system and labor logics. I think it's interesting, and AI could play a crucial role here in terms of, for instance, creating personalized experience and so on, or at least to detect patterns of what kind of micro-credential programs are needed and what sort of a context or digital learning environments we need to generate in order for being useful for those who don't want to attend for a full program of 4 years, but then just need something specific.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Micro-credentials is the buzz phrase, as you say, of the current period. But there is a lot more substance to them, I think, as you've intimated, that really, really useful for people who are in work, upskilling, for people who might have no possibility of attending a full-time program or whatever. I think the key for all of these things is how they're designed, and as well as their purpose. And if sound educational principles are included, then I think there's a lot of potential in all of those. I suppose the concerns that people have about AI is not AI itself, but that very specific subset of AI, which is generative AI. I mean, that's the one that, of course, is getting all the attention, and it's the one that has a huge amount of claims about its potential in education. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of concern that it's hype driven, and I think when you look at the details of how some of these technologies work, and I used to work with neural networks a long time ago as well, they're much more limited than they might at first appear. Especially the large language model ones, which are essentially exactly that, large language models, and they're able to provide a response to a statement that looks plausible, but there's no notion that it has to be correct or anything like that. And in the architecture of large language models, there is no way you can even improve that situation. You need to have a different architecture or a different combination of technologies. I was just going to share a slide there, maybe slightly cheeky, provocative, I don't know. But so the claims that generative AI is going to be revolutionary for everything, right? But I just asked the question: is it? When it's applied to education in particular? I think we need to be really careful. Again, back to that. What's the underlying conception the advocates of generative AI have of what human learning is about? One could argue that, for example, machine learning is about consuming huge amounts of information and then spitting versions of it back out again. But that's not what human learning is about. Human learning is much richer, much more difficult in many ways. So I think that's a serious question. Is the technology mismatched when to education, or is it, as you say, is there scope for it to help people at a personal level? I think it's really important for us to be able to distinguish between the actual capabilities versus the imagined capabilities. And that's why I've got it as a sort of a picture here of a trickster. You're lured in. Generative AI, when you first experience it, is incredible. You ask it a question and it answers so fluently. And I think that's part of the problem, because humans use language to communicate. But the written language that we're using is a means of sharing feelings and ideas that we have. So that normally when we receive written communication from another person, we see the writing, but we imagine what's behind that writing. Whereas if it's automatically generated from a massive plagiarism machine, essentially, there's nothing behind that. And I think that's disconcerting for people. I think at first, as I say, it makes us feel that there's intelligence, but there isn't any at all. It's a set of matrices and vectors. There's nothing behind it. There's no conceptual understanding. There's no ability for large language models ever to develop conceptual understanding or, intelligence, and as we would consider it. So I think we need to really understand what they're capable of, and only then can we see where is an appropriate application of them. And I think that's the problem. The problem is that there's so much, it's not so much hype, but fear that people are falling behind.
Exactly.
Institutions are desperate. We want to be the number one AI and education institution, or because that's what it's about, because we have a society in which there's competition, there's fear of falling behind. Just a few points there, actually, just because the slide's there, and I forgot to go on, but I'll stop in a minute, Liliana. I get too excited.
No problem. Go ahead.
So, I mean, when GenAI came, the single first most impact it had in education is the one that still dominates, and many of these companies had pushed solidly, which was cheating. Now, it's true to say that many people responded feeling that it's a terrible situation to actually suddenly turn all your students from the notion of learners to potential criminals. It's a terrible switch that is awful. But the thing is, many of these companies and these tools were deliberately pitching themselves to students who are vulnerable and under pressure or whatever as ways of bypassing learning. So, in Ireland, as in many countries, we came up with some guidelines for educators. That's one of the first document there. But we also, of course, like anywhere else, many educators and students, and in partnership as well, investigated and experimented and piloted lots of different ways in which the tools might or be used. And so there's some publications on that. If everyone, I'm sure, has links to those, but we can share others. But it does raise questions, I think, that we shouldn't really avoid, particularly if we think of the bigger purpose of higher education. If we really think about this higher notion, this notion that we have, in a sense, a public duty to be, I suppose, we have the responsibility of being critical thinkers, of developing knowledge and new ways of thinking, then we cannot avoid the ethical issues that underpin not just generative AI, cloud computing in general, actually, in terms of environmental impact, but generative AI in particular, with the issues around, as we know, bias in the system, the cheap labor that's used to, label all the content and to remove the appalling content that's out there. So I think that we have an obligation as institutions, but when it comes to the individual dealing with students and lecturers, lecturers dealing with students, I think we also need to be a little bit more honest with students, perhaps, than we have been in some cases, and remind ourselves that learning actually can be difficult. It hurts to learn something new. And if your head's hurting, that's a good thing when it comes to learning. That struggling with new ideas and skills is normal. And many students, particularly young first-year students, feel that they're not, cut out for university because they're struggling to cope. And they look for other ways around the issue. But I think we need to remind ourselves, new ideas are challenging. They should be challenging, and we should embrace that difficulty. And it's about building resilience, yes, but it's also about learning the advantages if we work as a community in working together on a problem. For many years, one of the things I didn't include in my little biography at the beginning, the place where I learned most about education was not in being a lecturer, an academic in physics, or a lecturer in educational design, but actually was many, many years I was an adult educator. I worked as a literacy and numeracy tutor. And that's really one of the richest experiences in my experience of working with individual people who are perfectly intelligent people, but for whatever reason in their life didn't ever master reading or arithmetic or whatever. And when you work with people one-to-one, try to form a common goal of making sense of something is so enriching and humbling, I think, for a learner. And I think some of that magic of learning, we sometimes lose in the transactional nature of much of higher education and certification and so forth. And we need to remind ourselves that human learning is something really, really distinctively different. And it's something that is potentially very rich. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you. Many things on the table. All of them super relevant. I'm just looking at the chat for a moment, and Berlin was saying, I believe this is called the black box problem, and I think this is referring to what you were saying of large language models, that they were only like trying to offering the most probable and most plausible response. I don't think that's a black box problem as well, but I really recommend I don't remember the full title, but it's about stochastic parrots, which is a metaphor that has been widely used. Yeah, exactly, by Tim Gabriel and a colleague. And I think that this is metaphor. It's really working, like a working metaphor to understand and to provide some context to do's and don'ts and capacities. To complement this point, I would say that, and we are supposed to talk also about digital transformation and leadership, and I have a question for you afterwards. But before we do that, we need to be aware that the front runners of all these technologies that are arriving to our classes and to our smartphones and to our students' smartphones and so on, are fostered by the industry, and the most relevant data and the most updated data that we have is coming from the industry, and of course there's an interest behind it. There are different reports, and we have many ChatGPT and OpenAI reports, but also we also have Anthropic, which has a more ethical origins, at least, right? And they are trying to build open science based on the uses that users are making of Claude and the different models and so on. But still, also when we look at the public opinion and the debates about AI, there's a lot of illusion. And when you see the headlines and so on, an exercise that I really recommend everyone, it's about if you take headlines and you change the word or the expression AI by magic or God, the text, it's still working, right? And this is reflecting something it's that we don't have. I would say that we don't feel that we have the agency to decide on which kind of technologies are we adopting and which not, and we should empower our institutions and ourselves to understand that we are not only passive users. There's also some conscience on what kind of tools are we using and how are we using them. And that being said, and before we move on aspects on digital transformation, you were also, while we were preparing this session, you were also talking of the challenge of senior leadership. And I don't know if you would like to expand a little bit more before we move on in other directions.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's so many. It is very difficult. I mean, people are in, essentially, I suppose, institutional leaders feel they're in a competitive context. When actually, in many cases, they can realize that's not necessarily the case. But also, they have to make decisions, and obviously, companies that are trying to promote particular products will seek to influence it as high as possible. They will try, and they know what works in terms of selling to particular groups of people. And quite often, that's a real difficulty when it comes to, for example, Gen AI. And similar things happened with MOOCs, to be honest, and also with learning management systems and so many other products. It's a push to say that these are strategically essential. That it's inevitable that world is going to be using these technologies, and you are disadvantaging your students by not engaging fully with the technologies. Whereas I think one of the key issues and one of the things that we're working on here in our institution and also in this European project is that notion of leadership and the role of leaders. And that digital leadership isn't just about making decisions about which company gets the contract, whether it's Google or Microsoft, but digital leadership in an educational institution has to have education at the center of it. And so an awful lot of our focus is trying to see how we can I suppose broaden the awareness and understanding of educational principles in leadership development and in leadership training. Because often people are promoted, as we know, in institutions on the basis of their academic track record, not necessarily on their expertise and education itself. And that can be a challenge. But in a sense, that perhaps makes them vulnerable to companies that are seeking large-scale contracts. So it's about building resilience, not just building resilience of students to cope in a complex world. It's about building resilience of educational leaders, institutional leadership, to recognize that actually, as you say, they have a slightly greater degree of agency than they might realize. And that many of the decisions that they make can be crucially important, but it's also the tone that they set within the institution that's really important. So I'm not sure if that's what you were asking me to respond to, Liliana, or if I went off track again, because I keep doing that. Sorry.
No problem. This is the richness of spontaneity, and I think it's interesting. So, and that being said, and I think that it really connects with responsible leadership, it's meaningless if it's in terms of digital transformation or organizational transformation or actualization of institutions, right? So of course we are having a change and mindset shifts in terms of culture, in terms of interactions, in terms of sociological imagination about what technology is and what's the role of technology and our role as users or even creators of technology, which also I think that for all those teachers on the technical side and that are promoting, the creators of technologies of tomorrow, I don't think they can miss the responsible leadership part. In engineering and mathematics and scientific programs and so on. So I think it's really crucial. That being said, maybe we can move on because time-wise, we have many things to cover, but there are also some questions coming to the chat, and we will be back to it in a second. Okay. Yes, we had planned to talk a little bit. I think that we have commented things, but maybe I don't know if you want to add something about the impact of AI precisely on higher education institutions. There's these overselling capabilities of the industry, but I don't know if you would like to add something else about new ways of evaluation or scenario walks.
It'd be good to hear from participants as well if they want to type anything in or raise their hand for the discussion that's coming up as well. Yeah, absolutely. Muriel has just typed in very quickly there. Excellent. It requires changing evaluation, changing assessment. The interesting thing for those of us who've been working in educational and curricular development for many, many years is a problem many university systems have is how they approach assessment. And so at least generative AI coming, suddenly being a threat, of students submitting automatically produced essays and reports has made many faculty members concerned about assessment. So we are having lots of conversations in our centre with teachers about assessment and valid assessment, kinds of conversations we would love to have had many years ago. But now there's a reason for them to come, in some senses, that's a positive. It's a challenge, though, to come up with appropriate assessments. But I suppose the main thing, and many people would say this, it's not really about thinking about just about assessments and evaluations that can be done that are AI proof. It's about thinking, well, what are we assessing? Why are we assessing? In many countries, people have modular and semesterized programs. And many of those degree program structures lead to far too much assessment, over-assessment. Students for every single little module have to produce a report, do an exam, so it's really been welcome to have that discussion about assessment and go back to the principles of what we're assessing. There's also questions about grades In some countries, there's an obsession with grades and scores, and others less so. And so we need to ask, well, what does 62% mean? Does it mean that the students can achieve all the learning outcomes, but only up to 62% of the level of understanding, or do they only demonstrate 62% of the outcomes? So all of those kinds of conversations are all overdue, and it's great that we're having them. I think one interesting thing here that we're seeing, and it'll be different in different countries depending on the tradition, but in Ireland, which is where I'm based at the moment, there's a growth in oral exams and interactive oral scenarios, which actually is quite rare in Irish higher education. Irish higher education has a kind of traditional focus on examinations and essays. So now there's much more of an interest in actually having conversations with students, and people are discovering that this takes a lot of planning, especially with large classes, but many of the academics who have been doing this over the last year or so have said it's really brought them much, much closer to the students. So that there are these positive developments that don't use the technology itself, if you see what I mean. And how the technology could be used is still an open question, because fundamentally there's still an issue with the fact that there's no guarantee that it will give you correct answers. And there's still the ethical concerns, and we have lots of students and lots of staff who are concerned. Again, if I might steal another couple of minutes, I'm based in Ireland. In Ireland, we have huge numbers of data centres supporting many of the big corporations as they reach into the European Union. They base many of their centres here in Ireland. And so much so that although if I look around where I live, there's lots of wind farms, there's solar panels, huge amounts of renewable energy. But in the last several years, all the renewable energy that Ireland has produced has been absorbed by the energy demands of the data centres. So it's almost like we haven't yet reaped the benefit. So lots of people are concerned about those aspects and saying, well, it's very easy for us to type a query in, but actually think about the impact of that. Sorry.
Yeah, the overall impact. Yes. I'm sharing in the chat the AI assessment scale, which is a very simple diagram that I'm sure you're familiar, and many of the audience can be familiar as well, which is a way to, I would say, to structure how are we talking about AI or generative AI. And also, I think that we are talking in general terms because this is a general webinar, but it would be different if we are talking about, the publicly available tools or these tools that you can be paying a monthly subscription and so on. But it's still different if you are not using it in a wide open public space, but that you are, developing your own AI in your institutions that maybe can be using the track records of your institution, all the documents about the historical reports and so on, and maybe some conversational AI bots where you can ask, what does your institution thinks of blah, 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 of a certain thing. And then, it's a way to gather all the collective intelligence that otherwise it's, working in silos and in parallel in different departments that we don't have to understand. We don't have time to be aware of all the activity and research that it's going on in our institution. There's also a positive side on that. And then I would also extend a point that you were saying. I think we are in a moment where we need to be brave to try and to fail and to make decisions better based on experiences, right? And I would like to share a couple of examples. One is that a couple of weeks ago we were having the AI Day at my university, fostered by the Center for Teaching and Learning, and basically they were gathering different experts in the field, in the European context, and also they were bringing students in class so that they are eager to be using AI in class, and they have been part of a testing program and so on. And also what students were saying is something that has been popping up in the chat as well. And they were saying, don't try to show us and to educate us on how to use AI. Teach us other things, because on AI we are more fluent than you, and we are more more risk oriented than you, and then we're exploring and we are learning many things, right? And from that point on, there was a huge conversation also about distractions that someone was I think it was Maria that you were sharing, that this is also a point for distraction and so on. So it's actually a need to make it in a wise way and in a reflected way, I would say, as a result of setting a context and setting a tone and so on, right? And another thing that it connects with the question that we had at the beginning by Pastor, and he or she was asking what kind of training would you recommend to improve the digital skills of teaching, of teachers, right, of faculty. At ESADE, what they are doing is basically to generate workshops and a sort of community practice that we are learning together, and they are showing us how to use it, not as a substitution, but as a complement, as a co-pilot, as Microsoft has named it, right? For the different phases and the different processes of teaching and learning, which is preparing sessions, which is ensuring a rubric that it's consistent with the syllabus, preparing materials and slides, also assessment and feedback and so on. And it's not in a way that it's, replacing the human touch, but improving it, right? And also, we have also been part of an AI case lab that has been promoted by Harvard. The business schools normally uses the teaching is based on case studies that are in a certain library and so on, and they shared with a community of international teachers some personalized GPTs, right, for educators and in a closed environment and so on, with certain capabilities of, for instance, combining case studies, or, for instance, to preparing discussions based on case studies and so on. It was quite interesting. I would say that there's no magic solution for everything, but I think now it's a moment that teachers start learning, right, and also this humbleness of that there are no clear responses, and the response depends really much on the context. And now it's time to play, to experiment, to share, show and tell, and make the better decisions for each organization.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I always like to experiment with the latest technology to see what's possible. And I agree. I just think that we also have to be careful too about we have to be critical about the drivers for many of these tools, and to recognize that they are not still capable of doing the things that we wish they were capable of. And until they change the structures, that they're not necessarily going to get there. I mean, I guess the concern I would have is that many of the companies that are providing these tools are recognizing that they're making huge losses at the moment, and they're desperate to get public sector contracts. Ironically, in a sense, because often they will talk about being the values of the free market and being innovative and disruptive. But at the end of the day, unless they can actually secure long-term funding, secure income. And so I think the educational sectors in many countries are vulnerable, in a sense, to these companies. They're desperate to get large-scale contracts, really, in public sector in many countries. And we need to have the self-confidence as a sector or as an institution to be able to recognize whether something is really worthwhile or not, and to be able to in a sense, to dictate the terms that are appropriate to our purpose as an educational institution, rather than simply feel compelled to have to participate in something, particularly since there's concerns about data protection and copyright and so much else. And it's interesting to see that some of the discussions are maturing, and in some countries people are thinking about providing an alternative system that's trained more ethically than the others, that's targeted to their own particular languages more than the standard models are, and also even in providing an alternative to the large corporations' cloud systems. So, for example, in the Netherlands, SURF, the national provider of technology support for education, has recently started using and making Nextcloud available as an alternative to using OneDrive and Google Drive and all these things. So that the institutions and countries can build a degree of independence from the market-dominating corporations. And I think that's important, really, in making sure that we steer. And that's why leadership is so important. And that's why there's so much effort needs to be put into professional development of institutional leaders.
Definitely. I was thinking about two examples of what you were saying. One is Anthropic, because I don't know if everyone is familiar with the origins of Anthropic, but two siblings that they were working at OpenAI, they quit OpenAI because they had ethical concerns, and they were discovering that the data was biased and that the models that they were using were not really clear. And then they started Anthropic, and they developed Claude based on different safeguards, right? Many safeguards were based on the technical side, but others were on the governance side, and they had red teaming dynamics where they have like a sort of internal hackers to detect the holes and all the issues with the learning system and so on. But also they were trying to protect the company in front of venture capital, right? So that decisions were not taken based on the profit interest, but based on the public interest, right? And they still have this clear red line for governance, right? But then all of a sudden they discovered that they needed more storage space, and then they had an agreement with Amazon, right? And then again, even when you are trying to build alternative solutions, sometimes we have this oligopolistic scheme, and the winner takes it all economy. So at some point, you still can end in one of the data warehouses that you have in Ireland, right? But still, this is not a reason for stop doing that. But it's, I mean, we have a long way in front of us. And the other example is about a pilot, a very tiny pilot that we had 3 or 4 years ago here in Barcelona, which is an activist group which was against the Googleization of schools, in this case primary and secondary schools. They developed a suite based on Nextcloud and different developments that they were offering like an educational suite, which is similar to Google Suite or Microsoft Suite, in order to ensure this technological sovereignty, right, in terms of data, and because there are many implications there. Because if your kid at 6 years, they have an email which is based on a Google account, it's the perfect excuse to have a Gmail for the rest of their lives, even when they are outside of school and they are grown-ups, right? This is not bad in itself, but in terms of data protection, in terms of ethics, in terms of digital sovereignty and freedom of choice, and so on, of course, we have some ways to walk over here, right? We also have some other questions in the chat, and please feel free to add more if you want. We have a question by License. Apologies if I'm not spelling well your names, just correct me. But he's saying, how did our institutions perceive and support our move to the market with our students? I understand that this is connected to career service after
or does he mean you're actually going to the marketplace? So maybe you can come in.
I'm not sure. If my interpretation it's correct, I would say, now you change your name to Lobo. Maybe it's easier to say. So what we have at my university is a career service. So for the, I mean, at any point of the program, students can refer to that in order to arrange, internships and in national, international context, and also a career service. And also we have an alumni association where you can still get some advice there. But I cannot tell you anything else about that because this is not my day-to-day.
It's a good question.
So yes,
it's also a good question if it is actually about you taking your students to the market.
actually.
I mean, is that seen, I guess, by the institution as legitimate learning? Is that, to what extent do you have the freedom to do these kinds of activities with your students? I guess that may be one of the questions too, because often academics feel they have to teach in a particular way, and that they can't do anything that's a little bit different. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that side of it. That's maybe my version of the question. Sorry.
I think it's open to discussion. Yes, I don't know if Lobo wants to add something else.
Or just to know that, because when you were saying that you and your students, you go to the markets and sometime to see how things goes over there, and you don't give them any rules, but you let them
Wander.
wander, and after you group them and you start giving them some assignments. So I wanted to know, for the digital market, when you carry your student and you go like that, how your institution is supporting such initiative, and how does your institution support you in such initiative?
Okay, now so you're referring to the actual example I was using before.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I get the thing. How is it supporting me? Basically the best way to do that. I mean, this market that I'm mentioning, it's 10 minutes by walk off the campus, and then what they ask me is that they can be back in class on time. That's it. I mean, there's not special support to do that. They trust and the teachers and their activities, as long as they are in the slot that it's planned, and of course that it's not affecting other subjects. But in case we want to do something really special, we can include this in the design of the course, and then we can accommodate the days and so on. Actually, luckily, I'm in an institution where they encourage innovation and they encourage real life experiences in class. Based on different options, right? It's inviting guest speakers, but also we have studying trips abroad. I mean, that we have many different ways to approach that. And particularly in subjects like sociology, which is about understanding real social dynamics, they are quite open to that. I don't know if that's helping to you, but maybe explaining that there's someone in a corner in Europe that they are doing that. maybe sometimes to have an example to share, and the experience of someone that you have connected with, maybe it's helpful. But I'm happy to discuss this bilaterally if you need more details on that.
It is interesting though, isn't it? I mean, I think if I might, you've probably spotted I jump in all the time. Sorry, I just get too enthusiastic.
No problem, go ahead.
Please forgive me. But it is interesting though, isn't it? Because so many universities are in cities, but not necessarily of the city. And I think that can sometimes be a wasted opportunity. I talked earlier about the lack of activation of the idea of a scholarly community, but it's also a community in the local area. And there's so many university buildings around the world are the same, regardless of which country they're in. There's an obsession with, a particular model that we have to be. Whereas actually, I think there's so much more we can get if we can engage with our local region, our communities, our cities, our environment. And I'm lucky. I moved to Ireland a number of years ago, where I'm based, and I'm on the West Coast. It's really beautiful scenery. There's the ocean. There's mountains. There's a local. The Irish language is strong here, and yet quite often you think, well, students are coming here doing a degree, but actually, there's so much more to being here in this specific location that would be marvelous if we could bring that into all of the degree programs more, I guess, make those kind of connections. Anyway, I'm just rambling. Sorry.
Thank you. It's always interesting to listen to your inputs. I'm checking the time now, and we have like more or less 10 minutes left, and I'm throwing a question for you, Iain, and for me, but also to all the audience. Okay, so this is a question for everyone. I think that it makes sense to close with this, given the topic of the webinar. And the question is, to what extent do you have ethical, if you have ethical discussions with your students about technological disruption? Okay, and Iain, the floor is yours. Then I will be sharing my experience, and then I would love to hear some experiences or some concerns or some realities of our audience.
That's a good question. I guess in some way,
wrap up, right?
but it's absolutely, and it's like, again, it's back to this, our model, our particular, I suppose, constructed social imaginary of what a university is. And what the relationship between students, knowledge, and academics is. And I guess that, if you see students really as partners in learning, then there's all the more reason to have those kinds of conversations with students about the ethics and the broader issues, the broader contextual issues. The question is, how do you do that in a practical, meaningful way? That's also seen as a genuine partnership, as opposed to just an academic exercise that doesn't have any consideration. And I think it's interesting because the huge many issues that students are always feeling passionate about. And at the moment, a number of issues are being talked about in class and on campus and so forth. And some of them are about Gen AI, like we talked about, the ethics of AI, the energy and the environmental impacts, not just of that, but the climate crisis, about war that's happening elsewhere, about the struggles of many people. I mean, it's that title, The Poly Crisis. There's so many things going on. And actually, that's one of the big challenges of being young in this world. It's so complex. There's so much negative information that, floating around. It's so difficult to steer and navigate a course. And I think it's not just that our role is to as I said earlier, many people are building resilience. It's not really about that. It's about thinking about ways in which we can engage as partners to try and address some of these issues and to think about their implications for us as we learn and as we teach. In practical terms, we have really strong partnerships with our students in this university, and in ways in which we teach, we explore technologies together. We have a scheme here called Digital Champions, where staff and students are learning together about technologies, and it's really interesting to see the dynamic there. We just say that everyone is a learner, no matter what age we are, what our background is. We're all learning things. That's what we're here to celebrate. A university should be about celebrating learning. So let's learn together. And so we'll pick a topic and say, anybody who's interested, come along and we'll explore this. And we'll debate and discuss. And we provide food, of course. That's always works. We find if you want students and staff to attend an event, provide pizza. But it's and so we've talked about ethical aspects and background issues about AI and some of those kind of sessions too, but also more generally, I guess it's invite debate and invite discussion. Make sure students are partners. Make sure students are represented in all your panels and boards and involved in making decisions as well about the technologies.
I think that's a very relevant aspect about giving them voice, because if we get back to the beginning that we were saying, and we were valuing that the university is a community, it's a human community with different roles in different moments of life and different but it's a contact point, right? If this is a community, then everyone in the community needs to have a voice. Of course, we need to define a governance, and not everything can be discussed. And we need, but even the governance can be collectively at least discussed, maybe not decided, but at least discussed, and offering them a voice. I think it's crucial, because it's a way that they can feel that they are really part of the community and not only users or beneficiaries of the services that we provide, right? I think this is really important. And the other thing, what I've learned in ethical discussions is that dilemma-based learning, it's something really appealing to, even for particularly for younger generations. And the most connected are these dilemmas that we bring to class, to their daily lives. The more in depth they will get, right? And you can start with something, I would say, marginal, that it's connected to their daily life, and then you can bring them to something more core and more more in depth, and so on. Also, it's interesting because if we think and we believe that we have in our classes, we have the leaders of the future, the present and the future. I would say that professionals need to be equipped with ethical lenses. And another discussion that I think it's important to have, it's what kind of ethics are we choosing, because values, there's no a single universal solution in terms of values, but also making them aware of which is their mindset, which are the glasses that they are looking to look at the world, right? And probably, for instance, in universities that have more opportunity to attract different international identities. I think this is also richness of university, right? Which the root of the word, it's the same as universe. So making it bigger, right? And at the chat we have some
open data
comments. Yes, Muriel says universities are unique institutions which carry multiple expectations and social responsibilities. Indeed, from fostering critical thinking to promoting open debates like the disruption of AI. Yes, indeed, I agree with that, and I think that we have a big responsibility on that point, and yeah, and debates among academics too. Yeah, of course, it's a hotspot for research, for learning, for teaching, and depending on the nature of university, also for accelerating projects, I would say, right? Entrepreneurial projects and so on. And also Pastor again has, AI depends on the availability of open data promoted by open access movement. However, data is not available for everything yet. Will take time to rely on AI. Yes, data, it's I think we would need a whole cycle of webinars on that. And also I forgot to mention something before in talking to my students. It's funny because about this dilemma-based learning, I was asking them, how concerned are you about sharing your personal data, feelings, and and secrets with generative AI interfaces? And they were saying, normally they are not really concerned. They feel they are in control of what they share and why then they don't share, and they won't stop. They wouldn't stop using AI regarding privacy concerns, but they are inclined to be using less AI when you have clear, connecting to the use of AI, the ecological impact, so the climate impact and all the energy consumption and all the CO2 emissions of data warehouses and so on. So if we want them to be responsible with their use of AI, climate change is an important vector far rather than privacy concerns or intellectual property protection.
And as you're seeing, we have a project here, like many universities have, on education for sustainable development and how we can build that into the curriculum in all of our degree programs. And it's really interesting just to see the passion and the concern that the students have. I think it's sad that we're in a world in which the young people have so many challenges to face. And
definitely
do our best to support them. It's our student counselling service now even has support for students who are experiencing eco-anxiety. That's a sad reflection of the world I think that they're in. But I think it's all the more urgent then for universities to take responsibility. We're an organization or an organizational sector that works largely with young people. And I think we have a higher purpose or a kind of moral responsibility almost to work with them and to try and help them shape the better future. Yeah.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more with your words. Okay, so I think that we need to stop it here, and I'm hanging again. I'm passing the mic to Aleida and the team at the headquarters of the GUNi.
Headquarters, yeah. So, so thank you very much, Liliana and Ian. Sorry. I think it has been a very enriching dialogue, and you have brought us insightful examples and cases, and I think that we should continue this discussion on this the impacts on this human community, no, that is the university, and how we give voice to the young, and how we incorporate them in this discussion. So yeah, I think that we can finish it here.